one of the things that is particularly interesting to people from your book is about the coming out experience for young people. Can you say a few things about what are some of the important things for a young person to think about when they're going through the process of coming out and maybe thinking about talking to their parents about their sexual orientation?
I think one of the very first things and most important things is to consider sort of the motive of why they feel, the individual feels that they must come out to parents. And I think there are good reasons, such as sort of sharing one's life with the people who are most important. Also to sort of feel more authentic and feel like in some ways or the other they cannot be their true self without really being fully out and disclosed. There are also bad reasons, and those are be rather detrimental. For example, out of anger, or to punish the parents, or I'll show them what it's really like. And I think those are kind of bad motivations and end up with a very bad outcome.
So one of the first things to think through would be sort of the reason for doing it. And if it is more about wanting to be authentic and wanting to open up your life to your family, like those would probably be good reasons to think about doing it.
I think so. I also think that the young person has to realize that even though there may be an initial disclosure, that it doesn't stop at that point, that it is not a point in time, but a process. And I think it's important for a young person to understand that they don't have to like dump everything that they've ever thought about their sexuality at one moment in time, but that it's a process. And they shouldn't allow the opportunity to disclose and to talk about their sexuality in the years to come. That it shouldn't be just like a closed book. It should be very much an open book. I also feel like it's important for the young person to feel empowered in the sense of that she or he can say what it is that is most important for him or her to say. For example, they don't have to use difficult words that will evoke all sorts of stereotypes for the parent, such as they might not want to say, I'm a lesbian, like it or not. They might rather say something like, you know, I find myself falling in love with other women, or I find myself wanting to date other women. And I think in that way it might be more, it might be easier for the parents to say, oh, okay, well that seems rather okay and normative. Because sometimes for the adolescent to sort of immediately start talking about sex, for example, or identity labels, that the parents can just sort of explode sometimes. So a more gentle approach, a more gradual approach, I think often works in a better situation.
So really realizing that when you first bring it up to your family, it's not necessarily the only time you're ever going to do it. You're sort of starting the dialogue, and that you might think a little differently about how you're going to start out the conversation than all of the things you eventually want to say, and maybe think carefully about what are the couple of pieces that you want to start with, which might be about attractions or who you're dating or something, but not necessarily using those labels.
I think in some ways it's sort of to know your parents and to know what works with your parents is sort of a smart thing to do. I also think it's a very smart thing to try out the coming out process. That if you have a good friend, or if you have a close sibling or extended family member, or perhaps a religious leader or a school counselor, it might be best to sort of try out the script, if you will, or to begin to understand or get feedback about how is it that mom and dad might react. Should I tell mom first? Should I tell dad first? Should I tell them together? Should I tell them face to face? Should I write them an email? Should I send it to them when I can escape quickly by going back to school or going to work? So I think it's important to sort of work out those things in advance. In other words, for it not to be necessarily a spontaneous event, but for it to be thought about and to sort of plan. Now, those are in situations in which the family has difficulty around these issues. Of course, there are other families where they've had these kinds of discussions from day one. They have a very open relationship, and the kid can sort of talk about their sexuality in a very gentle and normative way. That's the ideal situation.
Right.
Unfortunately, it doesn't happen as often as one would like.
So what are some other things that young people should think about when they're coming out to their parents?
I think it's really important for them to make an assessment about safety. And that is, if they have an expectation, or if there's some chance that the parent may throw them out of the house, or they might end their financing of the child, their education and so forth, that they might really want to consider not coming out to their parents. That is that there may be good reasons for them to delay that process. If they have to come out to their parents for whatever internal or external reasons, then I think it's absolutely critical that they have a safe haven, that they have a safe place They might actually want to come out to their parents in a public place where they can escape without harm or physical abuse. So I think that they have to sort of think in a smart way about the possible consequences of disclosure. And I think that's one really good reason to try out maybe your parents' brothers and sisters, your aunts and uncles, or maybe even sometimes your parents' parents, to find out how is it likely that your parents will react, or maybe the mom will be good and the dad will be violent. Well, then you might have to make some negotiations with your mother, or maybe, again, now's not the right time. Maybe you need to wait until you're in a safe environment where you can finance yourself, where you have a home to go to. Absolutely critical. You have to protect yourself at all costs.
So that again kind of speaks to the notion that maybe doing it in an impulsive way or just off the cuff coming out may not be the best approach, to really think it through a little bit and think about what your parents' reactions might be. And maybe if there's 3 or 4 different ways you think your parents might react, really thinking through how you would handle each of those different ways that they might react.
And a sibling, I will say this, that frequently an older sibling might be a very good indicator of that. The research actually shows that when you come out to your closest sibling, that is almost always a positive experience. Of course, not just any sibling, you have to choose your sibling carefully because not all will react in the same way. But I also don't want to be too frightening. I think that all too often we think about all the children who are thrown out of the home, and very few are ever really tossed out. And any child thrown out is way too many. But I think sometimes we overly frighten young people. In reality, only 2 to 5% are thrown out of their home whenever they do come out. So I think it's important for them not to be too frightened, to be so scared that they just think absolutely the worst will happen. It's also very important to indicate that the first or initial reaction of the parent is usually the worst. In most situations, the vast majority, upward to 80% as far as we can tell from the research, the relationship actually improves over time. So that the initial reaction is the worst, things get better, and I think that's very important for the child to understand. That is, okay, this was maybe a shock, maybe your mom overreacted, maybe your dad just totally shut down, but over time, things will get better, and that's why I always say this is the first of many conversations that you should have with your parent, not the first and the last, but a string of process.